Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm here today with Ben Durham-Kilcullen, VP of Engineering for Stova. We're going to dive into a topic that's becoming increasingly central to in-person events these days. Before we launch into my questions for Ben, I want to remind the audience that you can post your own questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll leave some time at the end of the webinar for Ben to answer them. So Ben, we're used to tracking data in online spaces, even if that's getting more difficult with the phasing out of cookies and this overall bigger focus on protecting privacy online. Does that mean we're relying even more heavily on in-person events to fill these gaps in data?
You raise a good point about this shift away from the kind of tracking metrics that we've grown used to online. So, with the digital landscape ever evolving, privacy regulations are tightening, and cookies being phased out, marketers are certainly looking for new ways to gather those valuable insights. And it's likely that this is part of the reason that events are taking a larger share of marketing budgets. And the data really supports this trend. So, for instance, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising's Bellwether report showed events are having the highest year over year budget growths of any marketing channel, with an increase of 23%.
Wow, 23% is a really big jump for just 1 year. So it sounds like that number is specific to marketing events. Are we seeing a similar trend across business events more generally?
That's a really good question. So, certainly a large portion of that growth is driven by marketers for whom in person events are an essential tool, but they're also key for all kinds of business deals, networking events, trade shows, fandom experiences, and more. As in-person events offer, a unique opportunity for face-to-face interactions, and those things can be more impactful than just digital engagements alone. Um, In fact, there's even further data that supports this growing demand for in-person events, such as the Freeman 2024 Exhibitor Trends Report, which found that 39% of exhibitors are expecting their budgets to increase this year. That's an 8% increase from last year, and this uptick to us really just signals a strong confidence in the value of in-person events.
Right. I mean, it's great to see this influx of interest and money, frankly, coming back to in-person events. And it sounds like all of this potential that they offer for gathering super valuable first-party data is one of the biggest incentives, along with this sort of face-to-face element that are driving this trend. I think you've given us a pretty good sense of the big picture, but what does that data gathering look like in practical terms?
Yeah, so in practical terms, it's all about finding non-invasive ways to gather data from attendees while enhancing their overall experience of the event. So, first off, having a robust registration platform and event tech like mobile app, it's really essential. This technology acts as the foundation for gathering all of that attendee information right at the start of that attendee's journey. And through the registration process, we can gather basic demographic data and preferences that help us really tailor that event experience to the attendee. Um, that may include gathering information such as, the staple items, right? So name, address, gender, organization, job title. But you can also dig into, dietary restrictions or preferences. You can ask them, how do they hear about the event? How do they feel about the location of the event? What are they looking to get from this event, right? Are they interested in networking, for instance? And what topics or what speakers are they most interested in? Um, and we can also further drill down into elements such as which social platform do they prefer? If they indicated earlier that they would like to network, what's their preference for networking? And then we can also ask them about, what content do you prefer at events, right? There's a number of different formats. There's keynote speeches, panel discussions, workshops, right? Product demos, case studies. All of this information can really help us to better understand what's the intent of our attendee, right? And also help us to tailor that event experience to them. Um, and really, as an extension of that, we get into things like the badging system, right? So, badging is not only an important way to identify attendees and to enable networking at events, but with the right badging system in place, we can gather really valuable data about their on site experience.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how, what you look for from a good badge?
Yeah, so there's there's a lot that goes into this, and certainly it's about what are the requirements uh, for your event, for your organization. But some of the things that we think about are, for instance, uh, your very basics, right? Badge stock compatibility. So paper badge stock, plastic, PVC. There's also sustainable badge stock, right? So recycled materials or low carbon footprint materials that can be utilized. And with that goes the retrieval of badges right at the end of an event for reuse because some badges have that capability. We can also discuss sort of form factor or the supporting element. So if you've got a really active event, right, lanyards may not be the best option for you. Perhaps wristbands are a better option for you, or uh, using one of those, I forget the actual name for it, but using essentially one of those sort of like pull cables that you would have at the waist side, or you could even have it on the pocket of an attendee. So badge stock, different form factors, right? You could use a bracelet in lieu of having a typical badge, or you could use it to complement it. There's also elements, obviously, like the design of the badge and print capabilities. So having high quality, clear print, being able to add your logo, right, the attendee's name, having the opportunity to add elements like sponsorship details, right? Sponsors love to have their logo or a piece of information readily available on badges, and so that's another thing that we would look for. It's
Oh,
also around. Oh, go ahead.
so, I mean, with all of this in mind, in terms of the tracking element, would you want a QR code on the badge or some other means to track attendee movement using the badge as this sort of central identifying device, essentially?
So that's a great question. So there's so first of all, yes, right, you would want a tracking capability to retrieve that information on site. There's different technologies and different use cases for it. So RFID is a very common one, and NFC is a common one also for more short range secure transactions. There's also technology out there such as BLE, right? So that's going to be your Bluetooth Low Energy standard, and that can be really good for ranges that are perhaps outside of the range of certainly NFC, but then of typical RFID implementations. And that can give you the capability to do things like beacons, right? So you can actually map out and see how people are navigating. Um, for very large venues, there's also the option of UHF, so the ultra high frequency, right? And that's going to be really helpful for you, not only for large distances, but it's also going to help you counteract things like, uh, you're in a venue that's it's effectively concrete building. There's many pillars or sort of structures, right, that break up these different rooms and separate them. So
Mhm.
again, it's really about your use case, but certainly having that capability with your badge is essential.
Right.
I touched on some of the technologies. There's also, traditionally we use like scanning of just barcodes, right? There's QR codes that are available. Then there's also that NFC piece where you can get just the tap essentially to check someone in when they're going into a session.
Amazing. Are exhibitors able to use this scanning or tapping technology as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a major use case for exhibitors. And lead retrieval benefits greatly from these technologies. So, with them, an exhibitor can scan badges at their booths and they can instantly capture information of those attendees.
I mean, it's so crucial to be able to collect those leads quickly and easily with a simple scan. That's still a pretty high touch interaction, though. Are there some more passive ways to track attendees? You went over this a little bit, but can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit earlier, but beacons in conjunction with heat mapping, that's another option that we use to gather and analyze attendee data passively. So again, you can utilize RFID or you can utilize BLE for these tools. And what they can do is provide you with that general traffic information, right? So footfall, dwell times. So showing us where attendees are spending the most time at the event. And they can also enable us to identify both those hot and cold spots throughout an event. Excuse me, I'm a little sick, so I have to pause a bit. They can also help us to identify like the hot and cold spots throughout an event, and that can lead us to doing things like activations, for instance. So it's not just understanding, as I said in the intro, it's not just understanding how are attendees, navigating your event and
Right.
who are they interacting with and where that interest may lie, but it also gives you an opportunity to further engage them, right? You can create activations. You can have, if you see a cold spot, but you want to attract more people to that area, um, you can have impromptu performances, or you could have like a recognition wall is something that's quite popular, or videos or things of this nature, right? There's a number of different avenues for that. But ultimately, it's certainly valuable to lead retrieval, and then activations are sort of a tool you can leverage to drive that foot traffic further.
Amazing. That's just sort of responding to it in real time and not necessarily just going where the action is, but drawing the action maybe to somewhere else, a cold spot, as you said, where it's that traffic is a little bit slow. Um, yeah, fantastic information. It's key to combine those higher touch tracking tools with more passive ones, so you really get the full picture. I'm also really glad that you brought up lead retrieval and the importance of being able to separate those hot leads from those cold leads. I think you mentioned the Freeman trend report earlier as well, and I know that one of the questions they asked the exhibitors was to identify the two most important factors for their success at an event. And something like 31%, so almost a third, chose industry standard lead retrieval as being one of those two absolutely critical factors. So I think the question then is, what is industry standard lead retrieval? What is an industry standard lead retrieval system? And if we're going to go one better, what would be an excellent lead retrieval system?
So this is really multifaceted, right? It's not just one thing, but it's several factors that contribute to making a really fantastic lead retrieval system, or an excellent one. First and foremost, and this goes with most technologies, right, is just the ease of use. It's essential. If it's difficult, if it's cumbersome to capture those leads, odds are you're not going to get the full benefit of your lead retrieval system. So you really want to look into ways to reduce the friction there. You want to make it like just as straightforward as possible. You want to give that feedback immediately to the person who's actually performing the lead retrieval, right? The person who's scanning at the event. And you also should give the ability for contact, right? There should be an ability for follow up on both ends. So
Right.
if I'm an attendee for an event, I should be able to follow up with like an exhibitor, for instance, who scanned me, right? And I'm interested in reaching out to them and talking about their offerings, right? Or even just saying, hey, I really appreciated having a conversation with you. And obviously, on the inverse of that, you would want the ability to take those leads, have contact information from attendees, and be able to reach back out to them. So really, it's the ease of use there is a major portion, and then the ability to have that back and forth communication.
Absolutely. Direct contact through the mobile app is essential. I can see how that makes so much sense. And, maybe an attendee might not even have had that contact in person, but they might have seen a demo and then they just want to reach out to that exhibitor after the fact. So yeah, you want to give the attendees as many options as possible to reach exhibitors and vice versa. Do you have any other insights in terms of being, a bit more tactical with your lead retrieval?
Yeah, I think another element that you can add to this, if you want to really beef up your lead retrieval experience or capabilities, is you want to capture engagement and sentiment data at the same time. So you don't want to just gather that contact information. That's valuable, of course, but you also want to capture that sentiment data. So you want to prompt users, or attendees rather, in real time, and you want to say, how was your experience, right? If it was positive or it was negative, right? What were the elements that made it positive or negative for you? So
Mhm.
being able to capture that information and capture that sentiment in specific details also gives us some opportunities down the road for personalization when we're doing outreach. It also helps us as an identifier of those cold or hot leads, right? So
Right.
obviously, if you've had a conversation with somebody on site, you've gathered their contact information, and you have information on when you met with them, you can do a follow-up response from that, and you can essentially say, hey, I really loved having this conversation with you. I'd love to chat further if you're interested. And they have an easy, frictionless way of communicating with you.
Right. It all feeds back into the hot versus cold leads. Are there any more automated ways to gather that kind of feedback, other than the exhibitor directly messaging the attendee?
Yeah, so I think that one other element you can utilize is doing lead scoring, right? So you can ask for inputs such as, are you an existing customer, right? Or are you a prospect if they're not an existing customer? Is there, to that same element, is there like a specific product or service that you utilize from us? Are you currently interested in these products, right? So maybe they're currently in a phase where they're shopping around and they're looking, okay, I've got some interest, I go to the booth. Being able to ask these questions of them, having like a small kiosk set up where they can go and fill in their information. These are really quite valuable tools, right? So in addition to just capturing contact information, having frictionless contact, giving them the opportunity to respond to things like, yes, I'm an existing customer. I utilize these services. I'm looking to expand, right? Those are really valuable. And then another one, which is, I mean, I would say I think it's table stakes at this point, is just having the ability to even provide notes, right? So if I'm capturing leads, I want to be able to take notes on this. I want to be able to say, Angela, when we had a conversation, you told me that this is your primary concern, which is quality, right? Or maybe it's stability. You want to have a partner that's going to be a long-term engagement, and you want to make sure that there's stability there, and that's top of mind for you.
Mm-hmm. And that those notes should go right into the event tech, right? This isn't sort of
Absolutely.
writing on it. Yeah. Just wanted to
Yeah.
make that super clear for our audience. And what about feedback, throughout the event, gathering attendee feedback?
Yeah, definitely. So you can either prompt through push notifications, you can have QR codes, right? So one implementation that we see is having a QR code where an attendee can scan it, and effectively they can give feedback. Hey, how was your experience at our booth, or how did you feel about moving past booths? Even how did you feel about this session? And they can provide their feedback that way, and you can tie that into either elements of gamification, or you could tie that into just elements of like social elements, right? You can offer a social wall. You can have them scan a QR code, they input some details, and then they can upload like a photo from the event, right? And that's really great to be able to source not only their sentiment, but it engages the attendees as well. And it also gives you some of that excitement, right? Like other attendees are going to walk by, they're going to see those elements. So all of these are just different touch points or interactions you can have.
And I guess you want to tie all of that back into the data that they provided during the registration phase. Um, and, with that in mind, the attendees put their information in when they register for the event, right? But there's also an opportunity for them to register for specific sessions, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually there's the ability to register for specific sessions, and that helps us gauge obviously the interest in the session. And there's other elements you can add, like waitlisting, for instance, right? If you have overflow or something to that nature. But you also learn a lot from the inverse, right? So look at the data in a different way. What sessions are attendees not attending, right? That also is a really big indicator to you. Just like we saw or discussed earlier, you can have cold spots on the map. You always want to look for both the I guess the positive and the negative indicators, right? You want to really balance that approach and look at it from both perspectives. So that can be really helpful.
Right. And I mean, sometimes attendees register for sessions that they don't actually attend. I'm
Right.
assuming that you can then scan the badges or create access control points at the sessions to really track the actual attendance.
Absolutely. So yeah, so we can have through RFID, we can have those check-in points, right? The access points, and you can control that. Also, is a piece for allowing or denying, right? So to your point, an attendee may sign up for it, but something else actually attracts their attention, and they may go to another session, or they may say, "All right, instead of this really isn't sort of my interest," and so they may leave early, right? So capturing them on the way out, also very important. Another element when we look at sort of if we think about that in two ways and we look at the flip of that is, are there any sessions where at access points we see that there's a high number of attendees who did not register for the session, right?
Right.
But they're trying to scan into it, right? And so then that shows an increased demand. And so you can use that to inform you for how are you going to set up your events in the future. So again, it's about really looking at both sides of the data.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about the no-shows, but sometimes the opposite happens where people just aren't able
Yeah.
to register and they're hoping they can get in. If you're paying attention, attendees will tell you what they're interested in. And sometimes the best tactic is just to straight up ask them. So, it sounds simple, but really there are so many ways to ask a question. What are some of the best tactics that you've seen?
When it comes to gathering feedback, there's there's a lot of options, right? And it's crucial to ensure that you choose the right one so that you can ensure that high level of participation and you can really get valuable insights from it. Um, One thing to keep in mind is that surveys can be really tricky. So if they're too long, attendees may just opt out of it. And
Right.
this is sort of where it's a combination of it's the art and the science of it, right? Of building out those surveys that attendees are going to want to fill out. And that also comes into the timing of it, right? And the live, give me your level of interest. So it's really a balance there. So one effective method that you can use is just simply NPS, right? The Net Promoter Score. Very simple yet powerful tool that just asks attendees to rate their likelihood of recommending the event on a scale from 0 to 10, right? And this gives you just that very quick snapshot feedback of their overall satisfaction, which can be quite telling.
Oh, I know I've answered a lot of those NPS questions myself. How likely are you to recommend our product? I think my tracking app asks me that, every couple of weeks, and I usually answer because, as you said, it's super quick.
Yeah.
What are some other go-to methods?
A Likert scale is a classic one, right? So it's where attendees can rate their agreement with various statements on a scale that typically can range from statements such as strongly agree to strongly disagree. And that can really help you gauge an attendee's opinion on specific aspects of the event.
Right. I mean, we've all seen those before too.
Yeah, and another element from that, just in the realm of, sort of simple feedback mechanisms, is you can always just ask them for something that's like a binary feedback, right? So you can just simply ask them like yes or no, positive or negative.
hmm Absolutely. Everyone's got time for a simple yes or no question.
Yeah.
And I guess for the event organizer, it really helps when all of these formats are already built right into your event app. Now, I mean, with that said, is it always best to go with these super generic approaches to prompting feedback?
No, so you touch on a really excellent point, right? So taking a personalized approach can be very effective. People are certainly more likely to answer if the feedback request seems like especially relevant to them. So
Mhm.
this is where you can implement segmented surveys, right? That's a great way to achieve this. By segmenting out your audience based on the data you've already collected at the time of registration and their engagement at the event, you can ask them more personalized, more pertinent questions. And that's
Mhm.
really going to increase the likelihood of responding. I mean, even think about your own personal experience. I know that
Mhm.
when I get asked a list of questions or I have a survey come my way that doesn't seem pertinent to, my experience,
Yeah.
oftentimes I simply won't answer it, right? Because it just feels like it's just a mass survey with no real
Yep.
bearing on where, my experience.
That's an excellent point. I've never really thought about that before, but I think you're right. It's almost like you're having a conversation with the attendees. The more relevant
Absolutely.
the question is, the more it shows that you're really thinking about their perspective and you're a good listener. There might be a point though where it could feel maybe a little intrusive, but I think if you keep it to a professional context and you're really just building on information that they've already voluntarily provided, it's
Mhm.
really more about being attentive than say, eavesdropping.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, it really comes back to those basic principles of conversation. I want to switch tracks a little bit now, but I think in a lot of ways, the topic I'm about to launch into is the natural next step in this conversation.
Mhm.
So everybody's talking about AI these days and the ability it brings to streamline all sorts of tasks. At the same time, we now have almost an overload of data coming in at in-person events. Can AI be helpful in analyzing all this attendee data, maybe even in real time?
Certainly. So this is an area that, like you said, it's an area that we're also thinking of, right? What are the implementations here?
hmm
So AI has significant potential in both analyzing the data and providing real-time recommendations to attendees through events. We found that AI and machine learning can be particularly effective in the latter. So enhancing the overall attendee experience by just delivering those personalized suggestions and insights. One area where AI and machine learning excels is really in networking recommendations, right? So you can analyze the information provided by attendees, such as profiles, interests, and interactions. And then you can use that information to make suggestions on who they should connect with, right? Connections that are likely going to be beneficial to them. And this not only helps the attendees to make valuable connections for those who are interested in networking, but It also enhances the overall networking experience by making it more targeted and efficient, so that you know that attendees are, or at least you can attempt to maximize the attendees' engagement, and the value that they're getting out of the event.
I mean, we tend to think of AI as this replacement for human interaction, but it can actually help
Mhm.
to connect people when it's used in the right way. What about
Yeah, absolutely.
recommendations or anything like that? Other recommendations beyond networking?
So beyond networking, I mean, content recommendations are another powerful application of AI. For example, AI can suggest sessions or workshops based on what similar attendees are engaging with,
Mm,
or what a particular attendee has shown interested in previously. And again, this goes back into having all of that data, be aggregated, right? You ask these questions up front, you collect data throughout the event, and then you can make recommendations based on that. And
And they're
overall,
Mhm.
oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say those recommendations are going out through the mobile event app, right? As push
Yes.
notifications or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this creates a more personalized agenda, right? And it
hmm
ensures that the attendees are getting the most relevant content for their needs.
hmm I love that once again, it comes down to the human element, right? This personalization. What are people like you interested in? When you registered for that session earlier, what did you basically tell us you wanted to learn more about? It's like
Yeah.
Spotify's Discover weekly list of recommended songs, but for events.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that agenda recommendations that are driven by AI, or attendee networking or matchmaking, where we can analyze like attendee preferences, past behaviors, the real-time data component. We can create sort of a optimal schedule for them, right?
Mm,
We want to make sure that they don't miss out on any of the sessions that are most relevant to them, and likewise we want to make sure that they're really building those bonds. Like, back to the human element, one of the best things, at least in my opinion, about going to an event is meeting with like-minded individuals, right? Having great discussions about things that are relevant to you or challenging, or even getting past that and just meeting people who you just have good conversations with, right? Not even necessarily in the context of work, but the relationships that are forged there. And this is an area where AI can really be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the AI is almost becoming your personal assistant, organizing your schedule, figuring out which sessions work for you and, which times you might have open. As someone who's been guilty of double booking myself in the past, I could definitely see the value in that kind of almost automated scheduling tool. And as you said, it can
Absolutely.
open up opportunities to meet other attendees.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is an area I think all of us are guilty of double or triple booking a spot, right? It can be really challenging, particularly when you're on site. You're trying to have interactions with people, enjoy the sessions. Maybe you're taking notes, right? You're trying to digest that information, and then having to worry about the piece of like, how am I going to coordinate with someone? This is
Mhm.
just one of those areas where we really can reduce the friction. Of attending matchmaking, of setting up, scheduling like meetings for them, for instance. AI can really help streamline all of this.
Yeah, I mean, finding a time that you're both free is always a challenge when you want to connect with someone at an event. So I can see how that would be hugely helpful. And when you think about it, all of these perks give attendees an extra incentive to interact with the mobile app, right? So, and at the end of the day, that translates to more data and more accurate data. So it's not just about using the data in real time, you're also probably increasing the amount of data that you're collecting, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you are.
So besides AI, what else can help with processing all this wealth of data that comes in during an event?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, robust data integrations are really essential, right? So your event tech platforms, so if it's a mobile app, or it's you're doing lead retrieval, right? Or you're doing access points and you're getting the scans, um, regardless of essentially what that entry point is, let's say, you
Mhm.
really want to make sure that with your event tech platform, that all of that seamlessly integrates with your like your CRM, right? So your customer relationship management platform, or your marketing automation platform, because that integration is going to ensure that all the data is collected during those different event flows, that it's in a place where it can be actioned upon, by marketing and by sales. And it provides a more complete picture of attendees' interaction and engagement. So there's just a wealth of knowledge there, really, that can be gathered. And to your point, I think this is this is sort of a salient one, is also just you have to really look at the robustness, the volume of the data you're gathering, but it's also just as important to pare down, right? We
Right.
want to, at times, it feels like we want to collect as much data as possible, but you also need to separate the signal from the noise, right? You need to really look at what's most valuable to me. And having that all in one space can really help you to go and pare down and tease out those insights.
Absolutely. And ideally, you want all that data to flow into those channels, your CRM, your marketing automation platform seamlessly. So you don't have to upload anything manually, speaking of paring things down and minimizing the work for the event organizer too, right?
Yeah, and having having integrated data, right? Having it all flow into one area, it's really crucial for sales teams. So they need to have all this information at their fingertips so they can follow up on those leads effectively. It not only helps the sales teams, but it also demonstrates the value of the event, right? That's something that many of us are interested in, many of us are after, is the ROI on events and how do we, prove that and how do we give those insights. And for instance, when a hot lead from the event eventually closes, right? It clearly shows the return on investment of that event, right? It's putting the event in eventually.
I love that, putting the event in eventually. It's so crucial to have that trail so credit can go where credit's due.
Yeah, absolutely. And another element to this that's really valuable is just having an automatic lead scoring system that can further streamline this process, right? We talk about cutting out or reducing friction in all these different areas. So having that automatic lead scoring system, tying back also to what makes a really good lead retrieval system, right, is the
Mhm.
ability to essentially set weights or set criteria on certain questions, or even without engaging the attendee directly, things such as, you can set a threshold. Okay, I noticed that this attendee was at our booth for 15 minutes, right? And we know the conversion rate on those attendees when they spend over 15 minutes at the booth is X% higher than attendees who only spend 5 minutes at the booth, right? And so these are really important pieces of information that you can tease out. And
Mhm.
again, it ties back into that ROI for the event.
Absolutely. You've got to take all of those factors, direct feedback, but also dwell time, right? All of these things can influence the likelihood for an attendee to convert. And as you said, if it's automated, then that helps to pare down that data. So you don't, you're not totally overwhelmed. The sales team isn't totally overwhelmed. The marketing team isn't overwhelmed. The event organizer isn't overwhelmed. So yeah, I mean, it's key for the technology to be integrated in that way. I can really see how that makes a huge difference. So we've talked a lot about analyzing data and how it benefits marketing and sales teams after
Mhm.
the fact. Are there other AI automations that can help event staff while they're still on site?
Oh yeah, another thing that comes to mind is chatbots, and I think this is an area where we're seeing adoption even outside of events. There's quite a bit of adoption in this area. uh,
Mhm.
Likely because the technology just simply lends itself to this use case, right? Having this, you know, set of information that it can retrieve and it can process the natural language. So chatbots are really another valuable tool that can augment, or even in some cases, replace the traditional like FAQ sections that you would provide. So
Mhm.
during an event, right, a chatbot can provide instant answers to common questions. That can free up your staff to be able to handle more complex inquiries, or
Right.
just even the day-to-day ongoings of events, right? Events are really dynamic. Uh, and you want your staff to be able to focus on the execution of the event and creating that best experience for all your stakeholders. So this is just another way that not only improves efficiency, but it also enhances that attendee's experience by providing, quick and accurate responses to their questions.
Absolutely. Both the sales and the marketing teams need to keep the attendees happy, right? Everything hinges on
Yeah.
that. Um, there's also always this idea of the marketing teams versus the sales teams. Are they both pulling their weight? Who gets to take credit? So we've touched on this a bit already, but can you tell me a little bit more about how marketing teams can use that data post-event to really show, their influence?
Absolutely. So I agree. Sometimes the dynamic between marketing and sales teams, it can sometimes feel a little competitive. But the data collected from events can really help to bridge that gap, and it highlights the contributions of both teams, right? And it creates a sort of like a harmony there between them. There's a number of ways that marketing teams can leverage, for instance, like post event data that demonstrate the impact, right? So
Mhm.
it's similar to the approach that we discussed earlier, just around segmented surveys. But by analyzing the post-event data, marketing can assist sales with basically better targeting attendees for follow-up. And they can
Mhm.
really tailor those follow-up communications based on specific interests and behaviors, right? Keep in mind that we've got, dwell time. We've seen where they've attempted maybe to go into a session where like they were at capacity already, right? Or perhaps they left a session early, right? If they left it
Mhm.
early, odds are you may not be interested in following up with something that's personalized or tailored to a session that they left early from, right? You want to go after where was their mind share, right? Where was their attention really? So this just makes that outreach process more relevant and more effective.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it comes back to that personalization element again. Are you reaching out to them in a way that shows you've really been listening to what they've already told you? Yeah, great points there.
Yeah, and marketing teams can even further refine future event content based on this, right? To your point of, are we listening? Are we making adjustments? Are we doing what's necessary or appropriate? We could we can look at what they said about the event, right? Do we have a lot of people who are traveling internationally? Does that suggest that there's a need to relocate the event? Does that suggest that we've got an audience large enough and diverse enough that maybe we have multiple events, right?
Mm,
Obvious budgetary constraints, but
right.
it can help you, it can help you make informed decisions. And that's what it's really about, is driving insights that benefit the marketing team, they benefit the sales team, they benefit the attendees, right? Sponsors, exhibitors, you name it. That's really the purpose of aggregating all this data, is about sort of that net good that comes from being able to personalize, analyze that data and present it in a meaningful way that really surfaces insights. So again, just going back to, being able to refine the content or the message you're going to send them, it helps you to more effectively communicate with them, and it makes them feel again like you're really having that conversation with them. Because candidly, that's really what events are about, right? When it
Mm.
boils down to it.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to think of data as being this privacy violation, but if you do it right, it's really more like a conversation. You're really just paying attention to the attendees. And like you said, it can really give you so many insights into each element, and ultimately that can improve the attendee experience. Before we move into the audience questions, I also wanted to cover some of the nuts and bolts of all this. So we've touched on badge scanning options, and you gave a lot of really helpful info there in terms of different types of materials and tracking methods. What about the internet connection, right? So we started by saying
Yeah.
that this wasn't online, but ultimately, if we're using event tech to enable all of this, we do need to have some kind of internet connection that's working well. Do you have any advice in terms of what event organizers need to keep in mind? I mean, this might seem like really basic, but I think sometimes some of this, you people could benefit from your perspective on this.
I think, and of course, part of it's a little self-serving, right? And I recognize that as a leader in technology, but part of it really is it's those fundamentals. Those are the things that oftentimes we overlook because we're so concerned about all the other complexities that go into planning the event, right? Like coordinating the event and actually executing on the event and then the follow-up after it, that we do overlook some of these details. For instance, like the venue Wi-Fi, which is a great one. So part of it is a selection of the technology you use. And that comes down to having, you know, redundancies that are in place, right? So you want to make sure that you have redundancies. What's that actually mean? So saving the data locally, right, before it has to communicate with a remote server. I know that's getting a little technical, but effectively, you want to have a backup of that information that's available to you at that access point or on that device, because network failures are going to happen, right? I definitely think that it's worthwhile for you to invest in a higher end Wi-Fi option for the venue. I would honestly say you should at a minimum have like Wi-Fi at the venue. I think that's really important because you can't always rely on cellular signals, particularly for larger events where, if you've got tens of thousands of attendees, right, and they're all together and they're all on that, cellular data, that can be really challenging for them. It
Mhm.
also can be really challenging for international travelers, right? So you have an attendee who's international, and now their option is, they may or may not have that connectivity, and they may have to buy like an out of country plan and things of that nature. So
Mhm.
definitely the Wi-Fi for your on-site is important. I think it's good to discuss both with the venue, the options. It's also good to discuss with like your event tech vendor. What are the options there?
Mhm.
So I would say, uh, get Wi-Fi that is that balance between the affordability and also the strength of it. Have redundancy methods in place, right? So you want to store it locally before you send it up remotely. Part of that is having like retry capability. That's a really major one. So if there's a blip, you want to be able to, push that information up still and make sure that that's not lost, right? So retry capability is very important. You also want the ability just to retrieve it at a later point in time if you need that option. Um, to touch on this, although I know we were discussing kind of more Wi-Fi, another one that's really valuable, and it's something certainly that we've implemented and seen good value from, is how do you coordinate, going back to like badge printing, right? How do you coordinate and how do you reduce those times for attendees who are flowing into an event? Having a system that live like real time monitors the printers and the tasks, right? The jobs and how that's fanned out to those printers creates a level of, let's say, robustness in that system where you can notice, okay, this line is actually quite short versus another line, and we know that based on the number of like badges that are being printed at this time. Or you
Mhm.
can say, oh my, this happens, right? Printers malfunction. We need to move that whole queue over to another printer. So
Mhm.
there's just a lot of different options for having redundancies in place to ensure the best attendee experience and to ensure you're actually collecting that information. Um, One other element I would just touch on is also, I think this goes overlooked sometimes, which is actually about the strength and the distance of beacons, right? So if you're setting up beacons and you set them up too close to one another and their radius is too great, that will actually blur your data because of the fact that
Mhm.
you've got beacons that are at booths that overlap with each other. And so it can be
Mhm.
really difficult if you're not then using RFID, right, for the attendees to tease out, well, wait a minute, which of these booths were they actually at? So these are different, and there's a number of other ones. I'm sure my on-site team, if they saw or heard this, they'd be saying, "Well, you forgot about this." There's a number of these different elements from a technology standpoint where you just want to make sure that you have a robust solution. You want to really think through those corner cases and be able to support the attendees on site.
Such a great point with beacons, and it would never have occurred to me. I think more is better, right? But sometimes less is better. And
Yeah.
that brings me to actually a really good attendee question here. When it comes to asking attendees registration questions, so this is the attendee question, isn't
Mhm.
less sometimes more?
Definitely. And that, yeah, absolutely. And that gets back to my point of that is where, like with surveys, but this is like registration questions even,
Mhm.
it's an art and a science, right? It's really a blend. So if you're trying to maximize for, and this is also data, right? If you're trying to maximize on reducing friction for registrations because you see that there's a drop off there, your option could be we're going to have a very lean registration piece where we ask very few questions, but then we're going to prompt at the event frequently through the mobile app.
Um,
That's the art and science piece. You have to really balance that. It's a great question, and it really comes down to what's the bare minimum data your system or like your provider system needs to function and that you need to gain insights, and then everything past that can just really augment and support you. It's a great question.
yeah, and you can use push notifications to gather that data strategically at different points in a personalized way, like you said earlier. What about
Mhm.
branching elements, like a dynamic registration where you might ask a question that will then prompt another question if it's answered in a particular way, but allows attendees to maybe skip over those branching elements that aren't relevant to them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it seems like things that come to mind immediately are like networking, right? Is an attend what's your primary focus for going to this? Is your focus as an attendee, I really want to network, I want to grow my professional network, or I want to meet, if it's a fandom event, right? You may say like, well, I want to network in the sense that like I'm interested in meeting up with other fans and I want to discuss this more. So I think it's really important to use that conditional logic to be able to narrow down the funnel of, okay, they've indicated they're interested in networking. What's their preference for contact? How do they want to network, right? Do they want to get text messages, right? Do they want to have follow-up calls? Do they want us to have those recommendations and suggest people for them to meet up with?
Mhm.
So you can gather that information there. I think the conditional logic is, it also helps you in other ways, like how do you want the flow to work, right?
Mhm.
And you can branch off of attendee types, and there's all kinds of logic that you can put into a registration flow. But yeah, dynamic or branching logic is certainly important to that experience.
Those are all excellent points. And I like that you mentioned there that you do provide the option for people to opt out of those recommendations. I
Mhm.
mean, I think they're great, but I could see how somebody might not want AI recommendations on who they should network with or what they should see.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be about consent, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and it also has to be about, is there an interest in it, right? In the first place, do they even want to network, right?
Yeah.
Do they want to see these types of offerings, or are they saying, well, my interest is really in the keynote. Like, I love the keynote. I want to see what's going on with the keynote. I may check out some booths afterwards. I'm not really looking to network with people, right? And we respect those decisions. And so that's where conditional logic can be really helpful.
Yeah. And again, you're using that data to personalize the experience. You're not just
Mhm.
personalizing the survey and the registration info. You're personalizing the whole attendee experience. So that's really fantastic. And it leads really well into this other excellent attendee question. And it's a pretty heavy one. How do you see AI impacting the future of event data analysis? So we kind of covered where it is today. Where do you see this going in the future?
So I think one of the big elements here is going to be AI's ability, especially through like event technology stacks, to really augment marketing teams and sales teams to better understand their attendees, right? To better understand their preferences and to be able to perform the analysis that otherwise it probably would have taken those teams so much time to do, right? They'd be focused more on the analysis at times and less so on improving that experience. And with AI, or machine learning, right? It can really surface, okay, well, what are the factors? Like, what are we seeing that's actually impactful? Because that can help challenge your assumptions, right? You may go into it and say, well, I know what attendees want. Attendees want as much as they possibly can get, right? They want a jam-packed schedule where it's nonstop, so it's exciting. They want to see as many, booths as they possibly can go to. But then if you look at the data for the people who have the more crowded schedules, right? Is that actually the case? Do they then show up to future events? This is something where you can cut the data, a million different ways, and AI will really help us to surface those insights and those interests, like what's statistically, not to get into all the math, but what's statistically significant there. And it will
Right.
save you just a ton of time in having to go and have the idea, create the hypothesis, right? And then test that through analyzing the data. The feedback loop on that is going to be
Mhm.
substantially faster through AI. And that's just one area. There's certainly going to be opportunities for AI to create, generative AI to create brand new content for attendees, right? I think we're only just scratching the surface of it, and there's a few things even that we're working on internally in this regard. But um, I think it's going to be really, really interesting. It's going to streamline things. It's going to give us new insights we've never had before. It's going to give us opportunities to create on-the-fly experiences. I mean, there's really a vast um, horizon on this.
And I love what you said there about what's statistically relevant, right? And I think
Yeah,
the AI could probably really help you tease that out. Like, was this session really popular because of the time of day that it happened in, and it didn't conflict
right.
with anything major versus the topic was super fascinating? And I think the more you kind of test drive these things and you have data to cross compare with a robust analytical platform, you can actually figure out and drill down, okay, this is why this really hit home with attendees. And yeah, it can help you, I guess, with pretty much everything, scheduling as well as content, and maybe even creating some automated content after the fact. That's, possibly the next step. Do you feel like perhaps, and this is sort of more of like a high level question, but do you
Mhm.
think that all of these sort of generative AI, deep fakes that are out there are potentially driving people to invest a little bit more trust in in-person events as sort of the counter to that? So this is a big departure from our data discussion, but I still feel like it's sort of the elephant in the room here.
I know. I love that question. I think so. I think that even before deep fakes and things of that nature, Excuse me, my my cold's
All
catching
right,
up with
you
me.
held out so well for being, this is, I think, the first time that, you've really lost your voice a little bit. So bravo.
No, I appreciate it. I love that question. I think even prior to deepfakes, I think even prior to sort of this concern around, okay, well, we've got generative AI, we see it can get pretty close to photorealistic at this point in time, right? It doesn't take much, for instance, to clone a voice or to be able to clone someone's mannerisms, even if it's not a really sophisticated version of that. I think that even before we got to that, there was still this element of you just online, it's you can have amazing engagements, but it's really challenging to capture the human element and what
Mhm.
it is like to sit across the table from somebody, like break bread with them, right? And really have those meaningful conversations when you're in capacity, like close proximity to one another.
Mhm.
So I think that there was already sort of a trust element or a human element that was lost in digital engagements.
Right.
And I think to your point, and an awesome question, I think that it's that is now being coupled with sort of this fear of, okay, is this, because there could be a point where it's like a question of, is this even the speaker, right? Or is this like a deep fake of this speaker
Right.
and they're not giving this presentation or something of that nature? So I could certainly see that. I think that's a partial driver, but I think that more human element, that more underlying fundamental, like it's intangible, right?
Mhm.
That human piece to it is the major driver. And I think that it's a little bit the trust factor as well. I love the question though.
Yeah, I mean, I think TEDx has some videos out now with speakers where it translates the speech, the presentation,
Mhm.
but it not only it dubs it sort of to match the speaker's expressions, and it sort of creates this AI generated mouth. I mean, it looks a little bit fake, but it's
Yeah.
almost believable. And you see how much it's advanced in the last year, 2 years, it's not inconceivable that within a few years that could be refined enough that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And that, of course, is like, an example where it's not sort of deliberately deceiving anyone. So I guess that sort of goes into the element of what kind of content you can create after
Hmm.
the event using AI. But interesting times
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, and you're right. It's all about the intent, right? If you're trying to enhance the attendee experience, if you're trying to streamline workflows and everything, if you're everything in, well, I mean, yeah, very broad, but like philosophically in life, if your intent is a positive one, right? Same thing should go for your technology, right? The intent should always be to do the best for other people. So I think that yeah, it's all about the intent of how you use the technology. Um, I think that there's dangers to it, but there's also like the use case you just gave, right? That's an excellent one.
Mhm.
I think there's other capabilities in this area that we're only scratching the surface of. But I also say, I want to hold on to some of those. So I won't give up everything that I can think of that we can do with it. But there's some really cool things in the future.
You gotta protect your ideas for Stova, of course. Makes perfect sense. Yeah, and I mean, like you said, intent, but also consent, right? The consent of the
Yes.
people. Are
Hmm.
they consenting to see something that, is fabricated, and are they fully aware that it's fabricated? Just like you need to take attendee consent into account when you're gathering that data. You need to take data
Always. Mhm.
actually volunteered and they're aware of what's happening. And like you said, even consenting to the service that you provide in terms of recommendations. I love that you actually have that additional element there that you can offer at Stova. So yeah, fantastic conversation today. I learned so much. And I think we really touched on a lot of big picture elements as well.
Mhm.
Just so fascinating to think about where AI is going and how much technology can really enhance every element. So, the attendee experience, but also sales ability to be targeted afterwards, marketing's ability to be targeted afterwards, and actually in real time as well. And then the content you can generate, having all of these technology elements work in sync together, I think is really the fundamental aspect there, while also, having sort of a moral compass at the heart of it. Some of it is legally legislated now, right? With the
Yeah.
European rules, GDPR and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think that we're moving in a positive direction. I mean, I know that marketing
Mhm.
teams may be a little bit disgruntled that there are these online privacy protections now and we're phasing out of cookies, but ultimately it's a situation where we're really taking what the attendees want, more into account, and also learning about them better. So, in
Yes,
doing that, we're also personalizing the content. We're saying, or the whole approach. So it's actually a benefit to them. And if you can explain that, then you can get them to opt in.
absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Ben. And thank you for sticking this out despite your, sore throat. I
No,
honestly,
thank you so much.
you barely even sounded sick at all. So you really held out well.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in to watch. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.